Hello, everyone. Welcome to Houdini Hangout for the week of May 10th, or actually, that's what today is, May 10th. Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight. Um, this is kind of fun for me. This is like the first time I've been streaming, and it's actually been light out, so it feels like it's not, the middle of the evening. I'm on East Coast time here, so it's nice to be having a little lighter out by just about sunset. But yeah, thanks for joining me. My name's Peter. I will be hosting tonight, and yeah, hopefully we'll be able to learn some cool stuff. Um, Hopefully you guys will have some feedback, and we can kind of work through this together. I'd love to hear from you guys. I'm certainly not the premier authority on Houdini. I do really enjoy it, and I really love working in it, and it's something that I've been doing for about 6 or 7 years now. But I'd love to hear any feedback you guys have, or if you have a better way of doing something. There's always room to grow and learn for everyone. So would love to hear from you guys. For my On my personal side of things, I do have a huge announcement. This past week, I started my job with Side Effects, so I'm actually working directly with all the teams that are you know, building and designing Houdini. So that's super exciting. I am on the educational team, so I am working with both college instructors, students and things like that, working with people that are basically teaching students how to use Houdini, and also working with commercial clients, studios, things like that, to help them get a better grasp on, different concepts in Houdini, whether they're transitioning to it, whether they're new to using it. So yeah, it's kind of a really exciting two-pronged kind of thing that we do, and starting to develop courses and things like that. Now, you probably won't see them publicly. I'm not a part of the marketing team, and that's really who you see mostly on the public-facing side of things. But yeah, if you do work in a studio or anything like that, we have a whole bunch of stuff that we have available for our commercial and educational clients that we kind of manage on the back end of things. So yeah, it won't be tons of seeing my face or anything like that on the Side Effects website, which I don't really mind. It's still a little strange for me to be doing all this streaming stuff, but I'm happy to be able to share things that I've learned, and just kind of have a good time, and hopefully we all get something out of it. So, but yeah, that's my huge news for the week. I've been 1 week under the on the clock, and it's been really fun, super exciting. The people over there are incredible. They're super great to work with, and they've been very welcoming. I'm still remote. I'm still in the same office that I've been streaming from for months now. I do leave after I'm done streaming, um, but yeah, so it's pretty cool. It's been a great experience, and if you have had any experience, talking to the support staff or whoever over there, I think you know that they're a great group of people. So yeah, just super excited to be on that team and be a part of that. And right now, starting to get some Solaris coursework that I've been starting to develop this past week, and so it's been fun. Learned a lot about USD and Solaris, that a couple little things that I didn't know here and there, and then just starting to put things together. So it's exciting, man. It is a really exciting thing to be a part of, and yeah, hopefully. If you are in the education world or in studio, maybe you'll get to see some of my training on there as well. So, but I'm still planning to keep doing this. I don't see any reason to stop, and I really enjoy the separate creative outlet that it gives me, and gives me a chance to kind of keep myself brushed up on all different parts of the software, no matter what I have to be doing for my job. So yeah, well, I think tonight what I'm planning on working on is some Mograph-style effects. I'm thinking doing some particle things, playing around with that a little bit, talking about just some different different techniques that you can do, with particles and with, just some different geometry type stuff. So that's kind of my idea for the evening. As usual, I don't have some grand outline set up that's gonna tell me what to tell you, kind of a thing. I'd love to hear, if there's any specific things that you guys are struggling with or need help with or anything like that. I'd love to be able to have that conversation as well. So please, chime in chat, wherever, whatever you're thinking about, even if it's something that's slightly off topic. I'd love to hear your ideas, and we can always say, oh, I'll table that till maybe next week or next time I stream or whatever. But, I'd love to hear from any of you that are watching. So, well, why don't we kind of start diving in and, little disclaimer. Some of the stuff that I'm going to be working on here comes from an Intagma tutorial that they put out years ago now. I'd say it's a free tutorial. I'm not giving away anything that they would have that would be paid or anything like that. But credit where credit's due. Obviously I'm not the inventor of any technique like this, but just just wanted to be out forthright and not make anybody think that I'm trying to say that I invented any of this stuff. So, which really, I guess nobody does invent these things. I guess it kind of is always a group effort. So, anyways, let's dive in and we can start messing around here. So I'm gonna put down a geometry. Yep, if I can hit tab first, I'm gonna put a geometry node down. If you ever do that and you run into this issue of having this thing, the little overview here, you can just hit O. That'll turn it to on or automatic, and there is a mode, like this, where if I hit O, now it'll be off. There we go. Cool. So, GeoNode, let's call this our source. Drop this down to this. Let's just start with something simple first so we can get maybe the ideas. Let's do a torus first. I think this is a pretty fun thing to use as an example for this. That was what they had used as well, which makes some sense. But all right, so let's just play with this a little here. Just gonna make it a little smaller. Probably up these values a little bit just to make it a little bit smoother here. Great. So we have that, and I'm just going to put a null down here just for now. Call this out. And so I'm just kind of setting this up in here so that we have, we have a place to put our geometry that we're going to create maybe later down the road. Maybe we'll bring something in that's a little bit more complicated later on. But this will be our source for right now. So let's do this. Let's go over here, make another GeoNode, and this is where we're going to do our let's make that purple. And I'm going to just do an object merge here. And let's do out into this object. Basically, this right here, this transform into this object, basically just takes any of your transform information here. So like if I had moved this in the object level here, translated it up. If you do it this way with the into this object, I'm going to hide the other objects, you'll see that it does go up in the y-axis like that. If I don't have a transform, or just reset this to defaults, it's going to go back to the center, because this is basically saying ignore that world transform that we've made at the top level. Don't worry about that. Just bring in the transforms that happened at inside of that geometry container. So into this object is a lot of times a good one to use, just in case you have some translation and rotation attributes that are adjusted here. So our properties, I should say. So we'll just say get source geo, and I'm just going to be as neat as I can about this. So okay, so we've got our source geo there, and let's just do a pop network here. Not sim, pop network, and I'll just drop this down. And this is like the quickest, easiest way to get a particle simulation in Houdini, it's going to do it basically immediately. And there we go, tons of particles coming in. It's scattering on the surface, cached out and everything. I'm just going to up the cache just a little bit here. We'll do it to like 16. And so this is just a standard DOP network. It's not anything different. There is no pop context or anything like that. If we go inside, it's just a really straightforward pop network. There's no gravity, there's no nothing in here. But this, I guess, sort of we can think about, dynamics as kind of having these three main things that we need, right? We need a source, we need a force, and we need a solver, right? Or need some sort of forces, right? Whether it's just gravity or wind or something like that. But those are the three kind of main things that you need in this DOP, right? We have our source that's coming in here. We have forces that we can add. We could add in something like gravity, right? Drop it in here at the end. And we have our solver, our pop solver here. Now, in that grouping, there is one other thing that usually comes along with it, and it is an object, something to hold that data, basically, and that is our pop object. That's going to be kind of our container for all of this data. So now that we have some forces, we've got our solver, we've got our pop object here, we're going to see that that's going to just fall down. And I'm going to hit this little clock icon so that we can, make sure that that's working. So, okay, we've got stuff that's happening here, but we don't really want it to just fall down like that. That doesn't seem particularly interesting. So I'm going to remove that. And we'll just go right in order here. We don't need to do anything, nesting in different kind of branches here or anything like that. Let's just do a pop wind. Let's do that. We'll just get something going here. So, kind of the two sections of this pop wind is the actual wind velocity right here, which is at 0, and then the noise. So as it is right now, nothing will happen because there is no velocities happening, there's no amplitude on our noise, nothing. So let's adjust that. Let's get one amplitude on our noise, and you'll see that this is going to start, moving around, doing its thing. So that's great. That is working pretty nicely. We've got we've got some particles that are moving away here. We can use our little velocity, vectors that'll show up here. We can see, okay, we're getting some nice, particle movement and things like that from our particle simulation here. We can leave this just in case we need it later, which we probably will end up using a little later, but so a lot of times you can just get rid of that and just have all your stuff kind of going in a line that basically just goes from top to bottom. And so, obviously the source comes in, then it gets affected by the wind, anything else you have in there, and then it gets put into the solver. So, so that is, that's about as simple as it gets right there. There's nothing crazy going on here. It's really straightforward. One thing I should mention is the way that this is sourced, right? So we have this source attribute here, or the source parameter section, birth, and attributes. These are kind of the main three. These two are more kind of back-end technical stuff, so we don't really need to worry too much about that. But so source is basically just saying where are we putting this stuff, and in that case, it is the first context geometry. When you see this first context geometry, all you need to know is that is these top level ports coming into this network, right? So that is saying use first context geometry. It's the first port. We're also going to do scatter onto surfaces, which basically just means use what's more or less a scatter like a scatter node would be in your in regular SOP network, and just scatter a bunch of points and just kind of randomly generate them on the surface. So that's what we're getting right there. And you can kind of see let's turn this down just a little bit here, maybe to like 400. We'll see that that's exactly what's happening. They're kind of randomly being born on the surface here and just flying around doing their thing, right? So that's great. That's doing exactly what we'd want for it to do. And I guess this kind of brings us into this birth tab, right? So we've got an impulse activation, which is basically saying, how many do you want in a specific pulse, right? In a specific, slice of this, right? So the impulse count is basically saying, every time this node cooks, this is how much is getting put into the system. So we don't have any count for that right now. We don't have any, the activation is on. We could turn that off. Technically, it's not really going to change anything because it's not giving you that impulse activation. What we are doing is this constant birth rate, which is basically saying, hey, you should save your file because you always forget to do that. Always forget to. I get too excited, just want to jump in, never think to save. What am I doing? All right, let me save this real quick here. Where I've been saving this to. There we go. That's where I've been saving it. Let's do this. 22, 05, 10. Just call this, I don't know, graph. All right. Now we're back in here. Okay, so constant birth rate. This is basically just saying how many per second are we emitting, right? So we're doing 500 per second. So that means that over this first 24 seconds here, I should have basically 500 particles. Actually, it should be to frame 25 because that's 1 second because we start on 1. So if I go to geometry, look here, I got 521 at that point. Here I've got 500. So I guess they are saying to 24 versus to exactly, it's not saying 24 frames over 1 second, I guess. So so at that point we're exactly at 500. Perfect. If I change this to 5,000 and go up to frame 24, I'm going to have 5,000. I have 5,001. So you can call me a liar if you want to, but I do have 1 extra there. So yeah, great. So we've got 500. We'll go back to that. Make it a little less dense just so we can see a little bit better what's going on. I think what I'm going to do is kind of trail these and make some cool little effects with it. Like a cool little geometry style effect that we can use. So we have our constant birth rate set. Another thing too that they've added, I feel like this is more recently, is the max points per frame. So that's obviously saying, very straightforward, each frame, how many points can you add in? Great. Don't go over 1 million, which we're not even going close to. So great. There's also max sim points, which is kind of cool too. So like, if you wanted to say the maximum is going to be, I don't know, 1,000. I wonder if this will cut it off, actually. That's a good question. Going up. And when it gets to 5,000, will it stop emitting? It's an interesting question. Ah, what a goof. I wasn't even thinking. Let's see. Yep, it will stop. That's cool. So that's a really kind of neat way to kind of have an upper limit to your effect. And I actually don't know if I've really ever played with that before. So it's cool that it's there. So you can have maximum points per frame, maximum points in your simulation. And there is also, I think, a way in here to... Maybe not, actually. There might not even be a good way to do that otherwise. So that's a good way if you want to kind of set the upper limit to your particles that are in the simulation. Just set that limit right there. Life expectancy is right here. It's at 100, so that's 100 seconds. So that's fine. We're not really going to have these like dying off per se, so there's no real reason to worry about that. So that's cool. Great. And then there's some other settings here we don't really need to worry about too much. And then inherit attributes are basically saying any attributes that are coming into this from this geometry, what should we inherit? We're saying inherit it all. There's really not much on that it needs to inherit, but and then, excuse me, sorry, I guess I'm a little tired. For the initial velocity, we can use either the inherited velocity or we could go in and set our own velocity. So what we could do there, if I turn off this pop wind, I can actually say inherit velocity can be at 1, but we can also say add to inherent velocity. This gives you a 1 meter per second velocity randomly in each of the axes, or a value between -1 and 1 in each axis, basically. And if I look here, will we have the velocity set? Sure do. There we go. So you're seeing, you got all these different random velocities, but they're not going over 1 at this point. So if I do that, it's gonna just shoot it out in a straight line randomly like that. And that's cool. That's great. What we can do then is add our wind back in, and that'll kind of push this away from that a little bit more than just like having it start right on the surface. So just like as an example, I can do a quick flipbook here. This should take virtually no time. So let's do that. I will do a flipbook with the inherited velocities. Let's do this real quick. Start it up. Just install the new daily build. Let that go. Writing out all the frames. So there's that. And then I will just say use inherited velocity and write another one. And we can see the difference. So let's do image, compare images, and they're left and right here. And what you'll probably see is at the beginning there's going to be a much bigger difference. So the one on the left is the one that's just starting on the surface and kind of getting pushed away. And you can see that it's not a huge difference really, but let me just look at the sequence list here. So this is what the one that just kind of starts there, and it starts like kind of more just like on the surface and gets kind of carried away by the wind, versus this one that kind of just gets initially pushed away from the geometry. So it's kind of shooting away first and then getting caught by the wind. So anyways, it's not a huge difference, but there is a slight difference. But I think I like it with it starting as a starting right on the surface and then getting carried away. I think I like that better. So the other thing I'm going to do is have a static object in here. And this is basically just saying this is going to be a collider in this. If you're familiar with something like cinema, that's what would be a collider considered as a static object. And I am going to say, let us just put null up here just to make this a little simpler. So we'll call this source. Color it just so I keep my thing in order here. And then let's go to SOP path here. And this is basically just saying, where do you want to get this geometry from? So I'm going to get it from that source node. And then we should be able to, I'm going to select this and shift click this and then hold down Alt and click to make a merge. And that's going to merge this geometry in. And so what I want this to be is basically, so I have a collider in here now as well as this guide geometry. So I'm going to turn this guide geometry off. And now this is a collider. So the thing that's going to be different here is that it's not going to be able to go back through this object, right? So it's going to have to stay at the source, kind of at the surface of this and then get moved away, but it's not going to be able to go through it. So it's going to keep itself from that. So if I hide this, you'll see that now there's still this visible kind of empty area there. It might be a little hard to see, but there's definitely an empty area that's not getting moved through, that this is colliding with. And so that is, nice and simple, nothing crazy. We can go in and tweak some collisions and things like that, but it's fine. We're not doing anything overly ambitious with this, so we'll just leave it as is and let it kind of do its collision thing. And that'll just hopefully make the effect a little bit more interesting, that it is sourcing from an area, not just like shooting back through it, and kind of keeps them separated a little bit. Another thing that we could do to make this a little more interesting is we could actually have the particles collide with each other so that they won't like make paths that like intersect through each other, so that they'll kind of collide and move around and stuff. So what we want to do there is a couple things. So we need a way to tell these particles what their size is, right? As it is right now, I'm trying to think if this automatically puts a p-scale on here. That's the p-scale is going to be the size of it, so I don't see p-scale. You can always search your attributes right here, like that. Sure enough, there is no p-scale there. So we want to add that. So what I could do is, I think there's a pop property. Yep. I don't think there's a scale. Nope. I don't think there's a p-scale or anything like that that you can set by itself. Nope. So I'm just going to drop this here just to add some properties to it. So we can actually just set a uniform scale right there. And this, now if we look, should add a p-scale. And let me search that again. Scale. Sure enough, 1. And as I adjust this, you'll see that that adjusts right there. This is our geometry spreadsheet. If you don't have this set up, usually this is up in your viewer here. And what you can do is click over here, say set top and bottom, and it'll actually split your viewport kind of right in half like that. That's what I did, and I closed the geometry spreadsheet that was up here and just kept the one down at the bottom here. And that just gives me a quick way of looking at, what's going on down here. So just as an example, now that we have P-scale on there, I just hit L to rearrange that as well. Just kind of tidies everything up. So let's go back up here and let's just visualize that at this level, right? So we want our geometry to come out of this pop network, right? And if we do, we can see here that we're actually seeing our source geometry as well, which we definitely don't want. So we need to go into this object merge on the dop network and just point to this pop object. That's the only thing we want to have come out. So let's just do that. Pop object. And these stars are called wildcards. And basically it says anything else that matches before or after that, as long as it's pop object somewhere in it, that's what we want. So there's only one pop object in there, so we're getting back our particles, right? And so some of these look like they're actually sourcing. Oh, right. So what's happening here is we're actually getting these colliding with the geometry, and it's pushing them away instantly. So we don't want them to be 0.84 scale. So because if we look at, I'm just going to use this quick P-scale reference. This is from AE Libs. We can see that is the scale of the particles, which is insanely gigantic. So I will do this instead. Let's take the pop property and go way down with it, probably to like 0.5 or something like that. And if we come back up here, we can see that's quite a bit smaller. It's looking pretty good. We're starting to do something. However, they are still intersecting with each other. We can see that. So what to do? What to do about the intersection? I'm just going to turn this down a little more. Yeah, I feel like those are still a little too big. Let's just do them like, I don't know, 0.01. It's really pretty small, but I think it'll do what we want. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Great. Again, like I said, I'm using this quick point preview just because it's really quickly copying these objects on here. I can do that several different ways, but this is just one of the fastest ways I can kind of visualize that. So there is our points, just as they are, looking pretty good. We don't have any weird like jumpy particles or anything as they're spawning, because as they're spawning, it's trying to stop that. It's trying to resolve that collision right from the start. So they are actually getting pushed out a little bit on the first frame. So they're just having that collision resolved on that very first frame. So that is happening, right? So let's take this and start. Let's get that collision detection kind of going. So one thing I find pretty easy to do for that is the pop grains, and this is kind of a way to kind of help push apart some of these different, push apart some of these particles and stuff like that. So let's just throw this in here. Kind of want that at the end because that's going to take the wind and use that in this. It's not going to add the wind after the fact. It's going to add it before and then go down through the grains. Particle separation. The average diameter of all particles, which if our P scale is the radius, that means we want it to be 2 times that. So what we can do is we can do copy parameter here, come down here and do paste relative references, and we can just do times 2. And that's going to be fine. 0.02 is particle separation. And that's basically just saying it's taking the average diameter of all particles. Perfect. Great. So, yep, one of the nice things is uses OpenCL, so it shouldn't slow it down too much to do that kind of detection and stuff. And what this should do is should provide collision detection for all these particles. Now, I think what I'm going to do is up the number of born particles here, back up to 5,000, that's the default, and let this kind of go. And we should see that these, in fact, look like they're kind of staying away from each other a little bit more now. And it seems like, to me, this is starting to kind of push apart and do the things that we want it to do. So let's kind of just let this do its thing. We know that this grain is basically just keeping, friction with any colliders and the particles and doing some of that stuff. We don't have any clumping turned on. We don't have any explicit constraints turned on. We don't have anything like that turned on. It's basically just helping us with some of our, basically just with collisions. So it's kind of a nice, easy way to just do that. And it's the way that the grain solver has worked in Houdini for several versions now. Obviously now Vellum exists and things like that, but this is a quick way to do this as well. So great, we've got our particles in here, doing all that, and yeah. So let's just let this run for a little bit. Maybe we'll stop at like 120 frames there. Great. So we can see obviously we still have our our collider working in the middle there. That's great. Let's do a trail. I believe what we could do is we could do a particle trail. So this is kind of like a really fancy combination trail sop and a few other things kind of all built into one. If we just look at the trail sop real quick, we can do this. And let's take this. So the trail sop, in and of itself, I'll just look at one of these particles that's way out here, just so it's not confined in it too much. This is basically just allowing us to make a bunch of points in a row, right? And so we can add this trail length to be higher, which is going to make more and more trails, or more and more particles where this, where this particle existed for more and more frames backwards, basically. So in this case, we have 6 right here, right? 6 particles, and they're all, kind of following the path that this particle has taken. So this is great in the preserve original. You can also do, there's some other things like connecting them as meshes, connecting them as polygons, things like that. The problem here that kind of tends to happen is that this one node is never like, I don't think is never like, I mean, obviously that's cool looking. It's kind of got an interesting look to it. There we've got, those trails are starting to be born and all that kind of stuff. But by itself, this is kind of a, this is a good starting point basically. But now what we've done at Side Effects is basically packaged together this digital asset here that allows you to have way more interesting trails and things like that you can create. So in this case, you can start to color over the age or color over the length, all these different things that you can do with this. You can have, different, methods for trailing and all this kind of stuff. And it kind of is just a really clean and easy way to kind of get your whole particle setup trailed and everything like that really, really easily. So, so what we can do is we can, there's all these different attributes and stuff like that you can output from it. This here is basically saying how long do you want it to be looking over, how many frames do you want it to look over, and that's a little strange. Oh, right. I think what you want to do is time blend the input. That's right. I think you want to actually do that. There we go. So let us do that. That should do a little bit better. Yep, there we go. Perfect. So the reason that I added that time blend in right there, and these quick setups are really nice. The time blend basically just allows you to look at, basically have have a reference of a whole bunch of frames kind of brought into, into the next operator, basically. So it's basically not just looking at where this point is at this one value, but it has a whole frame range that it can look through, basically. So that's part of it there. So, I mean, there's a million different ways that you could do this. There's a whole bunch of different things. This even has some splits in it and some different things there that you can do. We could set these to be sample of ramp, and now these particles are all going to be kind of, adjusting different colors and stuff like that. So we could set this to be, any number of different values. We could set color here for this. Then we could do something over here, green, sure, something like that. So you can do all sorts of coloring stuff, you know, sampling a ramp, doing some random stuff, you know, changing the alpha, the intensity, things like that. So this has a bunch more functionality that you can kind of add into it. If we change the substeps here, that basically is just adding some more points in there, some more smoothness. We can do this over a few seconds, you know, however many frames you want it to be over, and you can adjust here again, you can adjust the substeps. So if we have this off, oh, that actually seems to be working fine as well. I don't know why that wasn't working before, but we'll let this thing do its thing. So there we go. We've got these particles coming in here, looking good. Turn those off. All right, cool. So we've got some, you know, random shapes and stuff. Let's do a polywire on these just to get some simple geometry attached to them. And I'm going to turn the radius to, oh, that actually is not going to do it. So let's do this. I think the swoop will actually respect p-scale. Yes. Okay, great. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to do a round tube for the surface shape here. And then now we've got these all that are, you know, this is all looking at the p-scale for the thickness of these different kind of wires that we've made, right? And so that all seems to be working pretty good there. I'm looking around just to see if I see anything that's like, you know, things are really intersecting each other, but I don't really see that. It seems like everything's keeping to itself, which is exactly what we wanted it to be. Let's see if I change this to 1, if that will do what I was hoping for it to do. Yeah, actually, that makes probably more sense because it is, it's actually scaling the p-scale by that amount. That's the radius of the tube. So we could, you know, scale it a little bit less. We could do like 0.05. And then that way there's a little bit of, you know, boundary between each of them. But still, we're not seeing anything that looks like it's colliding or anything like that. So that's great. Very good. All good. And if we want to put an end cap on it, we can just do a polygon for the end of it there. And I'll put a bunch of caps on it at the end. And great. That all looks nice. And yeah, there's some different things that we can do, whether we're stretching it around the turns, you know, things like that. There's also one construction, maybe. Where this was. Yeah, it might just be stretch around turns that I'm thinking of. That can just help, you know, depending on how, you know, sharp things are or whatever. You know, turning that on or off could help your geometry look a little bit better. So that's kind of just, you know, we can kind of, this one has some weird ends to it there. So let's take a look at that. Yeah, I guess what that node is doing is saying, is it gonna basically grow as it goes along, or are you gonna? It's kind of almost like allowing it to not, or keeping it from like flattening out as it turns. So, so great. That is swept now. We've got all these different wires and things like that coming from it. So this is like a way that you could build up a ton of different, you know, you see people making these kind of stringy, you know, kind of abstract effects and stuff. And like, this is obviously something that you could tweak and play around with for quite a while. You know, you could find some interesting spots here. And the cool thing about this is that you're not going to really have a whole lot of intersection. There could be a little bit because over time they could all, you know, over a certain length of time they could occupy the same space. So that is possible, but it's going to kind of keep a lot of these paths separate from each other. So you're getting these kind of interesting flowing things that aren't, you know, really intersecting each other. And just as an example, let's try turning this off actually and see kind of how this gets built. So I'm going to turn off the pop grains and let this go to frame like one. Just let it go all the way to the end. It takes fractions of a second. Great. So now let's go back up here and take a look at this sweep and see what happens. And I have a feeling that a lot more of these, actually let's go back to 120 so they're not so massive. I have a feeling that we're going to see some more of these that are going to just be intersecting with each other. And sure enough, it looks like there are quite a few more that are intersecting in here and, doing some stuff in here. So, there might be some areas where you get less, some areas where you get more. But I think overall, you're going to get a much more interesting result if you have that collision being detected in there. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot that's kind of intersecting with each other, and yeah, like there's wires that are just kind of going through each other. So the other thing too is that it's going to kind of help them stay a little bit closer together and not just let these kind of fly all the way around like that. In fact, so there's some different reasons why you might want to do that, might not want to do it, but so that's kind of a really simple and interesting thing that you can kind of create here. You can have these. You can have these geometries, being created and stuff like that. The other thing that you could do as well with something like this, maybe if we turn the source amount down a little bit. Let's let that play out for a second here. I'm going to turn off this. That's kind of fun. You can actually watch it grow like that. Fun. When it's less, it'll actually calculate pretty quickly. But let's just say instead of doing this trailing setup here, let's just say, let's do a cone or something. I guess that's just in, I guess that is in, let's do a, something like this. Maybe we can do, an icasa, no, guess we'll just do a tetrahedron. Fine, that's fine. We'll do the transform and just scale it a little bit more in the y-axis 2, just like that, so it gets a little pointier. And let's do a copy to points. It's kind of another interesting little thing that we could do here. Copy to points takes two different inputs. One is the geometry to copy, the other is the target points to copy to. And when we look at this here, we can see that we've got a whole ton of little tiny guys flying around here. So now the tricky thing is pointing them in the correct direction, right? So what we probably want to do is adjust our normal direction, right? Because I don't think that these points have any normals on them. Remembering correctly, no, there's no normals. I turned the normal viewer on here, but we do have velocities, right? We know that that's more or less the direction that we want it to point in. So I'm pretty sure that if we do the normal direction, we can get these using the velocity and converting that into the normal direction. We can actually use that to orient our primitives. Here are our polygons. So let's do that. Let's do a attribute rename. Basically what we can do here is just take n and convert it to backwards. Switch that, flip it, v to n, like that. And that should now have changed. We should have normals pointing in the direction of travel, which it does look like. Yep. So we've got normals that are pointing in the direction that these particles are moving in, right? So now if we do a copy to point, and turn those off, we should have these more or less traveling. Oh, actually, they're traveling slightly off. So let's take a look at that. So what we are doing there is we have the N set up, but that is actually not the correct direction. We have the normal setup, and it's actually pointing in the wrong axis. So let's try this. Let's try setting this to up. Not sure if that'll work. No, unfortunately not. Okay, well that's fine. We can just make that work. So let's do this, B to N. And since the N axis is actually kind of sideways here, all we need to do is rotate this, right? So if we rotate this object before it comes in 90 degrees, let's try and see if that's the right direction. Yep, looks like it is. I'm going to turn these off so I'm not getting freaked out by that. Cool. So now the velocity is driving the normals. And we can also scale these up a little bit if we want to. Oh, sorry. Yep, that is doing it. Maybe by 2 just for this example. So it is using the p-scale attribute to scale these, but we're just going to push them a little bit further. Great. So you can do this with, all sorts of different, geometry, whatever, but you can kind of get some interesting, Mograph-y style things with something like this. Pretty straightforward. And you're also going to have a little bit of collision detection. Now they will, if you scale them up like this, they will actually probably intersect with each other. Hey, how's it going? Thanks for joining us tonight. Nice to see you. So if you have something like this, they will intersect each other a little bit here in some of these. So if you're setting this uniform scale to 1, they shouldn't. There should be very little intersection because they're kind of trying to stay away from each other. But that is, so that's more or less that concept too. So that's another thing that you could do with something with these particles like that. To make geometry like this collide and do all that kind of stuff is takes a little bit more conceptually to kind of make that work. You need to use the RBD solver as well as the pop solver and kind of combine them together, but we're not going to get into that because that's kind of another level of this. So, and it's kind of, oh, cool. Yeah, well, no problem. Glad to have you. Thanks for joining us, Theodore. Yeah, hopefully this will be something interesting, and we'll get some cool stuff going. In case you didn't see, we're doing some particle stuff here just to talk about how the particle systems work, how a pop network can kind of drive the creation of these points, and then trailing using something like a particle trail SOP will allow you to make some cool geometry. And also here, copy to points, you can use that same exact network, and instead of making paths and trails and things like that, you could actually copy geometry right to it, and that'll allows you to do some cool instancing style stuff. Let these things kind of fly around and do some interesting, something interesting, I guess. So there's that. But the effect that I really think is pretty interesting is allowing these geometries to kind of stick to the surface of whatever they're coming off of. And that isn't something that is so obvious right from the start in here, how you would do it. So the first thing that we need to kind of understand is how do we keep these particles attached to that surface, right? So I'm just going to call this standard. Just so we have some context of what's going on here. And I'm going to make a copy of it just so we can always go back to that and check that out later. So we've got our source here that's kind of driving both of those. And our source is just a very basic torus right now, nothing exciting or fancy. But let's say we have these particles coming in here, right? And instead of moving around just randomly like this, we wanted them to actually stay stuck to the surface, right? Well, we need some sort of a mechanism for that, right? Because they're obviously not sticking to the surface, so that's problem number 1, right? And so that's kind of the first thing we should address, right? Let's address how to get these things to stay to the surface, right? So let us start tweaking that a little bit. The only thing I'm thinking of here is we might have to missing something here. Just thinking. Okay, great. So let us do that. And we have our particle separation set here. So this is going to keep these objects, up a little bit. Great. So what we need to do is have a way to know if these particles are moving away from the surface, how do we bring them back, right? And there's a really easy way of doing that through using volumes. And so what we can do is we can actually do this from this source right here. I'm just going to take a polygons, right? And I'm just going to stick it in there. So now we have a source volume here, right? And I'll maybe change the voxel size a little bit. It doesn't need to be super accurate. Now, obviously, the more accurate it is, the better it's going to represent the shape of what you're using. So if this isn't a very detailed thing, so we don't need to go crazy with it. So we have a surface VDB right now, right? So that's great. Now, a surfaced VDB is basically saying that we have how far are we in this volume to the surface, right? How far is it from one of these voxels to the surface? And so that's a really helpful thing to have, right? Because if these particles are moving away from the surface and we sample where they are in that volume, we know, hey, we just need to push this back to the surface this far, and that'll be great. But the only problem with that is we don't know what direction the surface is in, right? We know from this surface VDB that there is that if a point is out here in space, that it is a certain distance to the surface. We don't know which direction, 360 degrees around this thing in a sphere, where the surface is. We just know the distance to the surface. So we also need to know where the surface is. So there's a really cool operator here. If we do VDB calculate, no, what is it? VDB analysis. That is the one. And so what we are going to use is this nice operator right here called gradient. So if we take this and put this here, this is now doing an analysis on this VDB right here. So this is, we'll say create surface and here we'll say calc gradient, just to make some sense of this. And what the gradient is going to do, which is, it's going to sound a little weird maybe, but it's basically going to say which direction is that surface in. And what it uses is the values as they're moving away. It kind of looks at those values, how they're changing, and says, okay, this is the direction they're changing in, right? As it goes away, it kind of figures out the normal, like kind of the normal direction almost in that volume. Like what direction is this kind of volume moving in? And that is your gradient. And so what we can do here, let's just look at our primitives here. We have a surface volume, but we don't want to output the same name, right? So let's do this. Let's append the operation name, and that's great. We can then take the gradient VDB, and so we have a surface gradient. And then we take this, shift click that, alt click to merge. We can stick that right into input 2. And so now we should have, we click here, we have a surface and a surface gradient. So that, now we have two volumes. They're both basically the exact same construction. They're both, in this case, 31, 11, 31. voxel size 0.05. So we have that merge set up. We have this gradient VDB, all this stuff. So these two things are what we need to use, right? So what we can do is we can look at where these are set up in this surface. And I actually think, now that I'm thinking of this, I think what I want to do is actually take this pop grains. I'm going to just jiggle it, get it out of here. I think I'm actually going to put this into the pre-solve. I'm not sure that this is going to work. This is a guess. This is totally me just trying to think about how this is going to be best solved. But I think what we want to do is actually have that collision detection first, so that if we move things back to the surface and they get pushed back out, there won't be any jumping there, basically. It'll just be hopefully happening all fluidly. Let's see here if that does. Nothing seems to be really an issue at that point, so that's great. Cool. Okay, so it's fine to have it there. I don't see any issue with that, so that's great. So the last thing we're going to need to do, though, is we're going to need to do some calculations in here. We're going to have to set something up that's a little bit custom, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to do a pop. So we're going to do a VOP network that is operating on our pop particles. So there it is right there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set an input for us here. So what I want to use is so these are just like it would be with a regular VOP, right? So VOP, here, got our 4 inputs, right? And so those are automatically bound to input, 0, 1, 2, 3, right? Or named input 1, 2, 3, 4. Depending on how you're looking at it, whether it's computer science with the 0, 1, 2, 3, or just like regular normal people with input 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is basically the same type of thing that we're using, but in here we have to kind of tell it what we want to be coming into those, because this just has one kind of data port at the top here. So I'm going to do input 2 to be the second context geometry. If you remember, we used this up here to source on the first context geometry. So if we come down here to the second context geometry, we know that that is going to be this dot right here. This is our first context geometry, this is our second context geometry, and that's going to be our volumes. So now anytime we use like op input 2 here, that's going to be sourcing our volumes, and this is going to be sourcing our geometry, right? So that's, or referencing those things, I should say, not sourcing. So what we need to do now is read both of those attributes in, right? So if we take, like for example, if we took, let's just do something really simple here. Let's just add, and this is going to be absolutely ridiculous looking, but let's take the position, here's the position out, right? And let's just do something like we're going to add, middle click on that, add a constant, and we'll just go add a vector constant and just go up by like 0.5 or something like that. So what this should do, it's probably too much. Let's do 0.1. So what this should do is, if we ran this, it should just start randomly moving these particles upwards, right? So obviously that's not what we want it to do. That's just ridiculous, right? So basically though, we know that if we're adjusting this particle at value in here, or this p value in here, this position value, that is going to be showing up in our viewport every frame. It's going to be adding it in, almost like a force, but not quite. It's basically just adding into those properties. So now if we do this, nothing's going to change. It's going to be exactly the same as it was before. Nothing exciting's happening. So instead, what we could do here is let's start getting some of those attributes that are coming from the volume that we created, right? So we want to do a volume sample, right? And we want to do a volume sample vector. So the two different things that we're going to use here are, well, let's set these both to be, probably primitive name will be better because we know what the names of them are. It's pretty simple. And we know that we're going to be looking at this op input 2 for both of these. So let's just do that. That can go into the file name, basically. It's basically just saying what is the volume that we're sampling is the file name. Whether it's from this port here or whether it's from a file on disk, you can use either. So that's great. The other thing that's pretty straightforward is if we select both of these sample positions and we set them right to P, if I can get to the top here, there you go. Now we know that we're sampling that volume at the particle's position, right? We know that that is going to be the position that it's being sourced from. So it's looking into this volume at that point position. It's going to output either a float in this case or a vector. So we already said back here, up at this geometry level, we said that we're creating this surface VDB, right? And then here it's taking a scalar value, which is our surface VDB, a value from 0 to however far away it is, and from 0 to however far inside it is, and we're setting that as a scalar value. And then this is calculating from that scalar value the vector that those are pointing in, right? Excuse me. So we know that we have both a scalar and a vector. So our surface is our scalar and our gradient is our vector. And so for those two, so we know we have surface and we have surface gradient. So let's jump back in here, back into our bot. Let's look at this here, and this is going to be our volume sample file. So this is just our float. So let's do this as surface, right? And then this is going to be our surface underscore gradient. And we could do it, oh, right. I kind of forgot about that one thing. We could actually not connect these as well if you wanted to. And select these, and instead of setting them to file, we could say second input. So that's another way to do it as well. Those are both kind of the same thing. They should both return the same value. Let's just see. Let's do a bind export on both of these and see what we get. This is just going to write the values to these points. It's not really going to do much of anything. So let's just do 2 of them, and we'll use this. We'll call this one surface. We'll call this one gradient, and this one should be a vector. Now it does automatically set that, but sometimes it's nice to just go in and make sure they're set properly. So we have a surface and a vector. We go into our pop object and our geometry. We can look at surface. There we go. And those are being written right now. Great. So we have our gradient, we have our surface, right? And so as these go through, they're going to be finding different values, all that kind of stuff. And you will see, once it gets to a certain value, it is stopping, right? So that might seem a little strange. Like, why are these values not going? So like when they first get created here, right? Okay, they're getting source, they're giving us values, and then it just stops at 0.15. Like, what's going on there? That's weird, right? That seems not helpful. So just to clarify that, what you're seeing is what's called the band voxels on this VDB. And what VDB does to make it a much more efficient way of storing data is it isn't actually outside of the bounds of the volume. That is a great way of thinking this, right? That is a good way of thinking it, right? So it isn't the bounds of it, right? So let's look back here where everything is like all inside of the bounds, right? Right, like this, okay? And if we go in here and look at our geometry, there should be some that are just about to start to hit the outside of it, right? But there is some parts of the boundary, or some parts of this bound that are within that, where it still will not write that. So like here, yes, that is the boundary of the volume, and sure enough, it will hit the boundary. But if you're in this corner here, you're not at the boundary of the volume, but it'll still give you 0.15. So like, let's look and see if we can find anything over here. I'll hopefully prove this to you. Let's see here. Let's see when we can find one that's up there. this one right here. Okay, we're gonna get a little crazy. So let's select that. Let's see which point number that is. Where are we here? Have to be on this pop network to select it. So it should be this one right here, I think. Let's just template that. Oh, this is actually, yeah, that's good. Okay, so that one's inside. The point number is, let's do this. Show selected. Let's, what? Freaking out here. Okay, let's go. Not sure which one that is. Null down here, and we'll select it there. I think that'll work better. There's the null, and we are on points. Shall I select it? Okay, this should work. So we are within the bounds of this volume here, but we are hitting 0.15. And so the reason for this is that there's actually only a certain area around this geometry where our values are stored. If we do this, now that doesn't show up. Okay, so let me think here. There is what is it? Sure enough, those are the active voxels within here. And basically, that is, that's interesting. There we go. Those are the active band voxels inside, right? So if we look at this, this is going to be slightly different than our source, right? So our source is there, right? And we have these voxels that are kind of outside of it, more or less. And so what we can do is if we turn this up to say, I don't know, 5, we'll see that this is going to grow. And basically what that's saying is it's asking it to activate further and further from the surface. And you can have this be done in one of two ways. You can use how many number of voxels. So in this case, the values, I can just do quick math in my head, hopefully. It's 0.05. If we have 5 of them, that'll be 0.25 is the highest value that will come out down in this null. I'm going to deselect that and not show when we select it. And if we look at surface, the highest is 0.25 because that's 5 voxels away from the surface. So what you could also do is use world space. And in this case, the exterior band, we could say, let's have it go up to 0.5, and interior it only needs to go 0.1. And so now, in fact, there probably won't be any because there's collision on that. But if we go here and just kind of let this do its thing, now the highest value that we should see externally is 0.5. So that is what's happening there. So we can kind of control some of those values by saying how many voxels in this exterior band and interior band we're creating. For this case, it's not going to be super important, but just something to know that's really a really helpful thing to know. So I'm just going to set this, I don't know, 5. That's fine. I mean, it's pretty much going to be the whole thing. It doesn't really matter too much in this case. We're basically going to just keep stuff stuck to the surface, but that should be good. So if you ever want to see how your volume is set up, there you go. There's your visualized tree. Kind of a fun little node to see what's actually happening inside of there. But okay, so we've got those two attributes. Yeah, volumes is a huge thing. I mean, there is so much to learn about VDBs alone, and the fact of the matter, just that it's like it's a file format as well as something that works inside of Houdini. So that's kind of the tricky thing. It's an interchange file format that they've incorporated strongly into Houdini. I mean, it's similar to USD, working in Solaris, where that's an interchange format, but it's also like kind of what you're working in when you're in Solaris. So it's like it's building these USD files and things like that. So it is an interesting and really deep part of it, and it can be really memory and calculation intensive. So be super careful when you're working with volumes, because like don't make huge jumps in your values, because if you go down too fine, it just is this like cubic runaway ramp of like you go from like 0 point, 0.05 grid spacing, like 0.01, and it's like you've got 100 billion voxels, and it's like you can't even do anything. So yeah, it's a crazy world too. And the other thing too, just with volumes, is that don't always believe your viewport, because your viewport has stuff set in it that is specifically trying to make it run faster. So if your viewport looks super like voxelated, pixelated, however you want to think of that, and you're like, I have way more voxels than are in there, just know that there is optimization that's happening in here. If you go into your go into your texture thing, there is a 3D texture resolution limit. So if that's checked, and it's at 256, I think is the newer default that they've been using, but if that's checked, it will only let your voxel get 256 on its axis, So just keep that in mind as well. Volumes are crazy. They can be tricky to work with, but anyways. Okay, cool. So we've got those two values. Sorry for the little rabbit trail, but hopefully that was educational to some extent. This is the first day it's warm in my town, which probably is funny if you live somewhere where it's... Ooh, that was weird. Got a little... Sorry. As you start getting older, apparently random pains come into your arm, and I just tweaked something in my arm. It's warm. I don't know what's happening. Anyways, I live in the East Coast, and it's the first day it's warm. So if you're like in California or something, like it's been warm since February, just know that this is our first warm day, and I really need to turn the air conditioning on, I think, but here we are. Anyways, okay, cool. So instead of using these just as bound values coming out of here, I'll just kind of slide this over. Let's kind of reconstruct where we're going with these, basically. Like, we want these to connect to our circuit. I'll turn this off, turn off the selected. Okay, so we know that our gradient here, so for these points, is pointing in a certain direction, right? In fact, what we could do is we could create a visualizer. I think it would work in here. Let's see real quick. I'm going to make a vector. I'm going to call this gradient. Yeah, thank you. Perfect. So we've got our gradient vector, right? And so this should always be pointing away from the surface, right? That's kind of fun looking, right? It's like a volumetric normal almost, right? So that's cool, first of all. But our gradient vectors, even when it's super close right here, right? It's saying that it has a magnitude. It's a unit vector. And if you don't know, warm there too. Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad we're getting some warm weather finally. I mean, it's May. I live in Western New York, and we actually had snow 2 weeks ago, I want to say. It was super randomly late. It was very abnormal, but it was a nightmare. It was like, please, for the love of God, just stop snowing. Anyways, so these are all unit vectors, which basically means that they're like normalized to across, like basically to a value of 1, or like if you had a vector that was pointing straight up in y, 0, 1, 0 is a unit vector. It's 1 in length. These are slightly off, so it's harder to exactly understand that, but they are a length of 1, basically a unit vector. So what we need to do is not have them be a length of 1, because that will push our particles way in the wrong direction, or way too far, whatever direction they're going to be pushed in. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the unit vector and multiply it by this surface distance. That will be our magnitude, and then we take that vector and add it to our particle. That'll keep it on the surface, or at least it should. I believe that's how this works. So we're going to keep moving forward, but that is my working theory. So another thing too that we should note is that if we push it in this direction, it's going to push the particle out. And it's going to push it out to here, basically, to the end of this vector. So we don't want that. So let's gate these. So let's do gates, and that should work. Yep. Now they're pointing in and through, which is not what we want again, but starting to do something interesting. So Oh, that's interesting. Once those get past, right, because yeah, once they get past those band voxels, the gradient goes to zero. So that it can't calculate anymore because there is no gradient. It's not trending in a direction. It's not the values aren't like traveling in a direction. Basically, it's like the direction of travel of the value. Like as the value goes up, you're like pointing in the direction of that value traveling, basically. So, anyways, so as it's not changing, the gradient turns to zero. So that makes sense. I was like, wait, why are these out here? Do I know if they have a vector? But it makes perfect sense. Anyways, so let's just kind of visualize what we're about to do here since we've got this set up. So we have this gradient here, and we want to have these vectors not push all the way through this into the inside here and all this stuff. We want these gradients to stop right, or these vectors to stop right at the surface. So what we can do here, I'm just going to flip these because I think this makes more sense when we do it like this. So let's do this and this, and we're going to get a multiply. Whenever you're doing... Oh, see, yeah, I'm not even a calculus person, but sure, I guess it is the derivative of the values. I don't know calculus, to be completely honest with you. Never learned it in school, so that is news to me. I'll have to look that up, but I like that, the derivative of the values. Man, if only I knew calculus well. Never got into... I stopped at pre-calculus. I guess the art world that I was in, or design world, never really was like, hey, you need to know calculus, so got there. So that's good to know. Thank you. See, now I learned something tonight. So yeah, so let's put this across to the multiply, and there's the gradient. There's our values to the surface, basically. Some of these might be a little bit off when they're further away like that, but there you can see that those vectors are basically pointing us back to the surface. Now this one here is not accurate because it's so far away, but it should, obviously they're starting to trend towards, being a vector of zero. But this should start to keep these particles on the surface and not pushing away. So let's do this. So we've got our multiplied gradient vectors here, and we're going to add those to here. And so, with any luck, I'm going to turn that visualizer off. With any luck, this should keep those particles on the surface. And sure enough, looks like we got particles moving around on the surface here. That's fun. The only problem that it looks like we're running into here is that they're kind of pooling together. I think that is because our pop wind is sort of pushed down. Let me just hide this here. They're sort of like pooling into areas, and I'm going to turn the pop wind up a little bit so that we get some more. Wow, that's a fascinating. Okay, derivative. The derivative position is velocity, and the derivative of velocity is acceleration. I love that. That's great. See, that's great information. Now I gotta go learn calculus. Jeez. Yeah, no, that's great. No, hey, that's awesome information. That's super, super great information to have. Yeah, I mean, for me, I've never really thought of it in any way other than just like how, velocity is how far it's going in a certain given time, and then, you know, as that time goes over more time, like the meters per second squared kind of thing, like just trying to think of it that way. But no, that's great information and makes a lot of sense to think about it in that way. Um, Fascinating. That is very interesting. All right, so I'm kind of wondering if I am running into an issue with this thing here. So let me bring that back down, see where that goes. That's kind of fun. Well, and see, in high school, I didn't think I would love integrals, but hey, I've No, it's cool. I love math too. I just never got into calculus. I love math in general. I mean, I learned a lot of vector algebra, or I'm sorry, linear algebra, just to understand how some of these things were working and stuff like that. So this is an interesting little thing here from an order of operation standpoint. It looks like if I have that being applied, if I have this pop grains being applied down here at the bottom of this chain, because it's trying to I'm actually kind of interested in that. That seems to not be doing what I would expect it to be doing, so maybe I'm missing something here. So it's kind of interesting because just the changing the order of where these get solved, like right, this is a post-solve step, this is a pre-solve step. So if I set this over here and allow this to be pre-solve and let it reset, it's going to kind of keep things a bit more on the surface here. So another thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to actually turn this off for a second, just so you can see how this actually looks. Oh, that's what the problem is here. Friction. Friction is the issue. That's why this is not doing exactly what I would hope it would do. So I'm going to turn this to 0 because we don't really, you can do it to like, now let's do this. Should be a lot more interesting. There we go. And we can do this maybe super low as well. And let's turn this pop wind down a little bit here. It's probably a little too high now. And so what we can do from here, I'll just turn this pop grains off. Sorry, kind of playing around here just to figure out exactly what's going on. So this is kind of the idea of how this works without the collision information being run basically on it. So we've got this kind of interesting look, right? And these particles are all kind of moving around and doing their thing. They're all sticking right to the surface, doing exactly what we would hope for them to do because this VOP is basically keeping them glued to the surface. So from there, just want to make sure that I'm kind of not killing too much of this, this nice movement that we're getting there, because we're definitely, yeah, there we go. We don't need accurate friction. No, thank you. That's much better. 0 and 0, great. That's fine. All right, so now it's actually keeping our geometry in a bit more of an interesting manner there. Because we don't really need the friction. This is just gonna more or less just kind of kill too much of the interesting movement that we're getting here. I mean, maybe you could turn on a little bit. I don't know. Try a little bit, see, but I think it's way more interesting to just kind of let everything flow around, do its thing. So I think this gets really interesting when you start to now add in the like a copy to points type situation, right? So I think these are maybe a little too small for this to be exactly what I would want it to be. So let's tweak that as well. Let's just go up here from our pop property and go to uniform scale. Why did I do such a little change? Let's do 0.1 and let's see how that works. Nope. That was too big. Let's do just double it, 0.2. Great. Yeah, that's way better. So now the only problem that we're going to run into here is that these are going to start kind of stacking on top of each other actually at a point. Point particle. So that's something that you kind of have to be a little bit careful of if you're doing something where you're sourcing particles in. What we could do instead is just create all of our particles at our first frame, right? So that's an option as well. So let's actually try that. Let's just do this. We'll take this out and this out. Go back. Sorry, actually, we will use this, the first input. But instead of it being a surface that we're going onto, in this case, let's just do a scatter here. Great. Great, so we'll get some points. And we should also be able to get out of this output attributes. Let's output p-scale. Those. Great. Got our p-scale there. And so the cool thing about this will obviously be that as we change our, we could just change our total count to 5,000 in this case, right? So that would be more or less our spacing there. And what we could do here as well is instead of setting these to be 0.0 or 0.13, sorry, 0.013, if I can speak right, that's just going to kind of keep them all more or less bunched right together. So like in this case, if we took this same setup and just copied it over here, if we're going to need, oh yeah, that's just setting that. I don't think we need that. Sorry, let me just get these points in first of all. So the thing that's different here is we've got an emission type scatter to surface. Let's just do all points, first context geometry. Sure. What are you doing here? Oh, yes. So when you have all points, it will literally take all the points, but you have to have the impulse activation set. And that's set to 0 right now. And you need that set to 1. That's the problem. So we'll set this to 1. And what this is going to do, unfortunately, I believe, is every frame is going to add those points in, which we don't want. So instead, what we can do now is let us let's instead do $f equals 1. So in the first frame, it'll resolve to 1, and then from there, it'll be 0. So we'll only just emit it on the first frame, and then it's going to be able to be moved around. And there we go. We got something maybe a little bit more interesting to look at there. We're not sourcing any points into this anymore. It's just kind of sitting at its you know, one value or whatever. So let's see here. Kind of wondering. Well, so the thing that is going to drive this is our particle separation here. So instead of having that be tied to this pop property, I'm going to delete this channel, and we can just kind of set this and use this as a way to kind of drive how far these points are going to be able to get, you know, how close they'll be able to get to each other, right? So let's see. I set this to 1, just out of curiosity. Let's see if that's changing anything. Maybe I was wrong about that actually being an important part of this, because I don't see any difference there. I know that there's this assume uniform radius, which it should be doing. Just basically a way to speed up the calculation. That's fascinating. I don't know why that is actually doing that. Anyways, all right, so we have that. That's actually going to give us our scale here. Cool. And if we change this, let's see if we rotate this back. Oh, yes, that's what we want to do. We're going to add some normals here, because what we want to do is actually use the normal value. We'll put this on points, and that should transfer over to the scatter, and in turn should move over to this. Should have normals on both of these as well now. Point normals, that is. Okay. Yeah, great. And that should work here. Cool. And I do actually believe this is exactly what we want. Great. And this was sort of the effect that they were kind of demoing on the Intagma site. Really, it was really cool to see. Now, unfortunately, it's interesting that is actually adjusting those normals. I'm kind of surprised by that. Oh, right. That makes perfect sense actually, because it's not solving those normals, right? So that's incorrect. That is not what we want. So we don't want to be setting those normals like that. We actually want to be taking attribute transfer. Take this and take this source. We're going to transfer just the. I don't really need a normal. I believe that, thinking I didn't need it. Points. Perfect. So we want a point on that. And then, if we get good normals that stay pointing away from the actual geometry, and we're not going to run into that problem where the normals are being, run through the calculation. Basically, it's going to be always taking that normal value from the surface. So if we go down here to copy the points and turn off this normals and let this play, these should all now stay pointing away from the geometry. Now the only thing I'm still seeing is that these are overlapping a little bit, which I don't want them to do. I'm not 100% sure about that. Why exactly that's happening, and why I can't get that to stay apart. That's kind of strange. Set this. Well, that seems to be adjusted. Okay. Yep. So it's really just the P scale. All right. So I think what I'm running into is that this. Do this. Let's do 0.5. Let's see if that's any better for us here. This is probably what we want. So let's just tweak this here. Change property here to. Well, that's an odd one for me. I don't know why that's doing that. Curious. Yeah, there is a point separation on the grains node. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And I had these two together before. It was basically saying it should be the diameter between them, which is 2 times the radius. See if that. Let me see if that actually does it. Maybe it's just too small of a value to see before. Also, let's merge this in here so I'm not looking at this person. And oh, no, that's not why. The other thing I'm going to do as well, now that I'm thinking of it, is that this is actually set. I'm going to do a match size here to make sure that this is justified in the Z minimum to same. Basically that way it's just sitting on the origin instead of, you know, in and out. There we go. That should work a little better. Great. Yeah, let's just let's delete the channel first. See what that does for us here. Yeah, see, I'm not seeing any change with this, which is really odd. I don't know if that's... Oh, yeah, what I had disabled is actually the friction with particles. Yeah, exactly. Yep. I was just about to say that. Yeah, it's friction. Yeah, I disabled the friction with the particles. I mean, we could set that back on, you know, with the particles, and then when they collide with each other, there will be some friction there. But yeah, I am just really confused by that actually. Collision behavior. Just missing something here. There's really so little you can even do on this. I mean, there's collision behavior is pretty much the only thing on that solver. I guess I could just turn the bounce off on that just to make sure there's not some weird thing going on there, but I really doubt it's that. Alright, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn down this wind a little bit, just so it's not as strong. Huh. Actually, it looks like it's trying to like overdo the collisions now. It looks like it's actually like they're all colliding with each other, and it's like trying to figure out what's going on there. So maybe that is the issue. Back here. Sorry. Sorry for the long, the long, thoughtful silence. I'm just trying to figure out why is it doing that. All right. That doesn't look like it's intersecting, so that's good. Hey, we got something. All right. Let's try them a little bigger. Just a little bit of difference there. 125. I might have to come back to this one. See if I can find out what I'm missing here. Because it seems like it should be working a little better than it is, but I don't know. Well, either way, hopefully some of these concepts are at least interesting to think about and play around with. And I think the last thing I wanted to we'll leave this one where it is. It's more or less working. Just the collision thing is acting a little funny, and I don't need to sit here. Yeah, troubleshooting, right? That's it's one of the main things in Houdini. Sometimes it seems. So the last thing that I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about was Mops and how that works. And I'm not going to try to go into depth onto how to use it to do all the amazing things that you see people do. I will do some of that, but I want to talk a little bit more about what it is, kind of, and why it's interesting and kind of important, and why the things that you really should take from it, right? So, I haven't really used Mops at all because, for me, most of the stuff that I was doing in Houdini was, sorry, was specifically simulation, aspects and things like that. So I'm just gonna turn these off real quick. Like a geo node. So, so I wasn't really doing a ton of motion graphics in Houdini. A lot of the stuff I was doing was, hey, make this blow up, make some water here, do this and that, all that kind of thing. And that's not really what Mops really excels at, as far as I would be concerned. And we use Cinema 4D in our studio that I was in previously, and that kind of fills that world of motion graphics and all that kind of stuff pretty well, and it's quick and it's fast and all that kind of stuff. So, and that's what Mops is basically trying to bring into Houdini, is that motion graphic kind of side of things, so that you don't have to be moving back and forth to cinema, right? But we already had cinema, so it didn't really matter for us in that sense. So it wasn't like a huge driving force. But yeah, I mean, his courses are going to be amazing, absolutely amazing. So highly recommend seeing those guys, listening to everything they do. I mean, they're obviously, he's associated with the guys from Atagma and all that kind of stuff. Like, super super great guys. I haven't really seen any of his training before personally, Toadstorm, but yeah, they're a super good team of guys, and like just seem like they're such a great wealth of knowledge. But I was just like kind of playing with it a little bit the other day, and just kind of like seeing what it is and what it isn't, and all that kind of stuff. And so, like, I'm sure if you're taking his courses, he's going to be breaking this stuff down a million times more than I could ever, because I didn't design the whole thing. But so like, if we look at the instancer here, for example, and we look at just some objects to clone, right? I'm just going to do test geometry just to be very, very Houdini-ish here. So let's do that. We'll grab the pig. Well, good. Hopefully it'll be somewhat interesting to kind of see how it works, and then how to actually use it to its fullest potential. Because I don't have like the paid version or anything like that, and I think there's stuff that you can do in DOPS that actually I just check. I don't think they even ship that in here. Yeah, it doesn't look like there's yeah. So I think there's some stuff in DOPS that you can get with the full package that they ship. I just have the free version or whatever that they have provided. Kind of a cheapskate, but you know, what are you gonna do? So let me just grab another test. That's another one. That's interesting. I don't know. I guess Tommy, a weird one. One of the weird ones. All right, so I'm just gonna shift click all these and throw them in here. And there they all are starting to get instanced. And let's see, we want to instance these onto, great, we want to do them, so here's where we are. So we have a distribution type grid. There's a bunch of other things you can do in here, just like with Cinema. If you're used to that, you can do linear, you know, radial. Now these are probably too small. Let me scale this up just so we can see what we're actually doing here. So there's radial, there's linear, you can make it longer, right? I mean, it's all straightforward stuff, right? Nothing that anybody's reinventing the wheel here. But this is the basic stuff, right? So I'm just going to do it from maybe I'll just do it on a grid, for example, and we'll just do the size a little bit more here. And I don't want the step to be so small. Let's do it to like 1 and 5. Actually, no, 10. This is 1. So, all right. So we got all these different objects in here. You can see the viewport is still really fast. I'm trying to make me sick by swinging around so much. We get a full frame, full whatever, and we have 100 points, 100 prims, which if you haven't heard the concept of packed primitives before, that's kind of a cornerstone of the way that they've developed Mops, and I think it makes a ton of sense. So what we're actually looking at here is a way that they're instancing these objects onto points. Basically, it's all points when you get to the very base level of it, right? And the one thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to do a match size here, and I'm just going to make sure that these are all the same size. Basically, I'm just going to do scale to fit, do best fit, and just copy this across to all of these. That's just going to make sure these are all kind of like in a 1x1 box, you know, just like this, basically. If they're not scale to fit, and now they're centered, justified, all that kind of stuff. In fact, maybe I'll do minimum like that. Yep, I'll just select these all, set them all to minimum. This match size is great. If you haven't been using, I wasn't using it for a while. I didn't realize it had been added in to Houdini at some point, or maybe I just missed it from the start. But yeah, match size, fantastic, absolutely great. So there's all of our objects here in our grid. They're all now set to be within a unit cube, basically unit volume, and they're randomly assigned on here. That is being done by this instancing, and you can see here if we slide that all around, we're getting a different random seed, right? We could do ordered, and it's just going to do 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it's going to do toy, pig, Tommy, in order through all the numbered points. And if we did a point attribute here, we could actually drive what index we want, right? So maybe let's start there, right? Just as a fun kind of starting point, right? So Mops is really, I think, really using a lot of stuff on these point attributes, right? Like if we look at the primitive attributes, there's basically nothing here. There's everything on point attribute, right? So they have all these fall offs, index, things like that. And so what we could do is instead of using the distribution on the grid, we'll just do it from a mesh, right? And I will just make a template object. Let me just hit every node. Let me just do a grid, and we'll do a scatter on there, just to maybe make it a little more interesting than just gridded points. Scatter. Null here. Say, so we'll just use this. Actually, I'll just drag and drop this up here. And that should be our instancing. Right. That's weird. That already worked for me before. Oh, because it wants a mesh. My bad. Doesn't even want to scatter. Stop scattering. What are you doing? Cool. So we've got the source, and it is actually doing its own scatter here. We can set a point limit right here, right? And then it has all the scatter attributes. That was kind of silly. Wasn't even thinking. Cool. So we've got that, and we can, set this up or down. Now the only problem now that I'm thinking of this is I actually can't set that attribute there. I don't think. Now that I'm like just processing through this, let's just go back to the grid. That'll be fine. Great. So what you can do is obviously copy these attributes. I'm not sure where they get these attributes from because I would have thought that you would set those on the points, but it seems like you're not, so I'll let Toadstorm be the expert and actually tell you how to do these things. So we're grid, instancing. We're going to go back to just random. Just let it be random, right? And so now they have, if we look at Mops here, they've got a few different things. So we can do like a fall off, for example. I'm just going to do a shape fall off. It's a pretty straightforward one. Oops, having a hard time. Shape fall off. Let's drop that down. And what this will do is obviously give you these different fall offs that are very similar to something you would have seen in, let's say, cinema or something like that. You can preview your fall off. You'll see it go like that. Great. There it is. Super exciting. Unheard of things. I'm really just whole new thing you never could have imagined doing. Anyways, sorry, I'm just being silly. It's getting to be late, so slightly loopy, maybe. All right, so let's put that there. We'll just animate this fall off across 20 and do this to -6. Will that get us there? Yep. Keyframe, great. Got our attribute going across here, right? And I think the reason we're seeing that color change there is that it going to just the shader is because I think because there are shaders on those originally. If we would have deleted the shader, I think it would just be white. Yeah, so it would just be blue to white basically. And so it's like actually multiplying that over top. I think if I turn this off, that off, just have them all regular, then we visualize it, it'll be blue to white. And it's probably easier to see anyways, so we'll just leave it like that. Cool. You can do other ones too as well. You could do spherical, right? I mean, they're pretty straightforward things, right? Spherical, box, the normal things that you would get in any, in any of these Mograph-style things. I'm just going to leave it at linear for right now. And there it is, right? So now we have a fall off going. So we have a fall off, we have our instances, and then from there, you would do something like a modifier. And so what we could do is a modifier like transform modifier, and let this translate to, sure. So there it is, right? So now we've got, something that's very straightforward. These objects have a fall off value, and as it gets added into that fall off attribute, you can see them changing down here. They're moving into position, right? And you can see that this fall off attribute is being written in, or is kind of by default put in here. And, so here you can see fall off attribute Mops fall off. Even here, it should be probably mentioning it somewhere. See it in here, but I'm sure it is in there. So anyways, so that kind of flows through this whole workflow that they've created. So they've created some of these. It's really kind of a framework of how to work with these things, right? I mean, if I had a bunch of packed primitives, I could use this Mops transform modifier and work with it. Like it'll work with what I'm doing. It won't really matter. So basically, they're creating this workflow with the tools that Houdini offers already, right? And so they've really packaged a ton of stuff into here that kind of is making this more what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, I can't think of the word right now. It's totally escaping me. Not optimized, but it's kind of like a framework to work with it, right? And so they've created this very standardized, that's probably the word I was looking for, standardized way of working with these packed primitives, with the fall off attributes, things like that, so that as you add these nodes to it, it knows what kind of you're looking to do here. So I'm going to do another attribute on this. Maybe I'll do rotation, so, just so it does something a little more interesting. So it kind of, that's actually really silly. I'm going to do this. Let's do it that way. It's a little bit, hopefully be a little more interesting in that direction. Just looks so silly. Oh well. All right, so let's go to Mops and let's do another modifier, and let's do a spring modifier. Let's do that. And so what this is going to do, or it should do, it's going to add a little spring into it here, right? And so really the thing to do is basically look at some of these different attributes or different parameters that they have. This is the mass, and it represents how much they'll resist the change in velocity. Spring constant is like basically how stiff your spring is. So I'm going to turn that down a little bit to like 3 or something. And then the damping coefficient, basically it says if it's at 1, it's going to oscillate forever. So let's turn that down to, I don't know, 7.75. And so now if we let this go, it's going to kind of jiggle and bounce back and forth. And yeah, we've got this really fun little silly thing it's really not anything that interesting, but it's, it's the basis of, what you're doing in this framework of Mops. And so the other thing I believe that we could add in here is we could do some fall off noise, I believe. And that would be noise fall off, yep. So I think if we add this here and add it to be maybe multiply, see what that does. Nope. Oh, right. I'm not in the actual thing where it's doing anything. So I think what we'd want to do is just the frequency here. So we are actually, I think I need to preview, there we go. Preview that fall off, right? So I would need to do, maybe an overlay would be what I'd want, and that'll add the noise just in there. Yep, that should do it. So if I add some frequency in here, maybe a little bit, should add a little bit of noise, and let's see if that'll change this randomization just a little bit. Yep, so that adds a little bit of randomness to it. And we could also add a little more randomness by changing this fall off scale to be 2. And I'll just adjust this a little bit so that's not, it's probably 7 and 7, yeah. 8 and 7, great. So now we've got these objects that are kind of coming in here. Probably could adjust this noise fall off even a little bit more. Here. So we've got some randomness coming in there, whatever. So yeah, I mean, obviously you could set this up a bunch of different ways. Add the noise into it, I guess. that's probably not going to exactly do what you want it to do, but it's going to start in this kind of weird position, and then they'll all kind of, you can do all sorts of stuff with these. But basically, these are going to, they're going to work within the framework that they've created here with these different, um, attributes and things like that they've set up. So this is basically just affecting that fall off value here, and keeping these to be, within whatever range you've set them to. And yeah, so, I set it to screen, which is not what I meant to do. Hopefully it's fine. So yeah, so that is the very basics of what's going on here, right? But let's now look at this from a little bit of a different viewpoint, right? Because these are, while this is all happening, quote unquote, in Mops, it's not happening in just Mops. It's happening in the framework that they've created called Mops, right? There is no context called Mops. It's not a special thing that you have to have their specific thing to make it work. It is a way to standardize like what you're working in, and that's the beauty of it, is because they're doing so much in here under the hood, with all these crazy nodes and things that they've developed in here. And I mean, I can't even guess half of the stuff that they've probably done. Like, some of these aren't going to be crazy, some of them are going to be insane. There's going to be a lot of code in some of them are going to have no code in them, whatever. But the thing that's really amazing here is that they've created a really easy way to work with packed primitives. And that's kind of the beauty of this. If we turn off, let me turn off the fall off preview on these. You can actually probably keep those shaders here just to make these maybe a little more interesting looking. Go. Great. All of our guys here. Cool. All right, so we look at this. If we use our middle mouse click and look at this, or just use the eye here, we can see that there are 100 packed geometries, right? Which makes sense based on a grid and all that kind of stuff. It's a 10 by 10 grid. So we have 100 packed geometries. And what that's saying is that we have 100 basically entire geometries that have been collapsed, and all their information is now stored, like their transform information, all that stuff is stored on one point. So they are now being like optimized in Houdini to be looking at this one piece of geometry, and kind of you're instancing now all this geometry across it. So this is an idea that's always in Houdini. And if we even just go into, I could sit and explain this for a while, but thankfully they do have Mops things in here, which is amazing for them to have done. But if we looked at packed primitives, click here. If you haven't looked at packed primitives before, highly, highly, highly recommend taking just a glimpse at what's going on in here, because this is so fundamental to what's happening in Houdini, and why packed primitives are really helpful, basically, and how it can save you memory, can save you, viewport speed, things like that. So basically what you're doing is you're taking these pieces, packing them down to points, and then doing all of these different things on it. It's what packed RBD is doing under the hood when you're doing rigid body and stuff like that. It's just a really, really great way to be able to work with big pieces of geometry. So take a look at packed primitives in here in the help file. It'll explain probably way better than I could ever do. Might be a little bit dense, but the pictures are nice and kind of helpful as well. So, but let's talk about what's going on here from a kind of more basic standpoint. So let's just drop an add sop down, and kind of a weird sop, but this one will delete the geometry but keep the points. So great. We got all these points, right? And if we look at this, all these points are still doing stuff, right? So that's kind of interesting. And if we then look at the origins, we can actually see these things are going to flip around just the same way that our geometry was, right? Because all of that information was stored on these points, right? It wasn't it wasn't that it was working with that geometry. It was that it was adjusting these point positions, right? So what I could do here, and I don't see why this won't work, is if I did something like point jitter, right, on this, it will move these objects around, right? This is just a standard point jitter, and it's moving these objects, right? But that's just like one factor of maybe how they would randomize these objects. They're going to maybe have collision detection in it so that they're not going to be, intersecting each other, and there's going to be maybe like a push apart effector and things like that. But just understanding that at the very basis of what's happening here, you're using a packed primitive on a point, right? These individual points that are geometry that's packed in there, right? So what what you could actually even do with these, which is I think kind of interesting, is you could take these, you could take something just, super simple. Let's just do, and points. And what this actually has on it is an orientation right here, right? And so that orientation is actually what we're visualizing here, these like axes. And this copy to point loves that. That's its favorite thing that it's looking for. And so if we do this, we'll see that that's going to work just perfectly, right? With the boxes. And so it's really not so much about the fact of this is only a thing that's happening in this one Mops thing, and if you aren't fully using everything in that, it's not gonna you can't use it with other things. You know what I mean? Like it's a structure, it's a framework, it's a way of kind of thinking about these things being, packed objects, and it ties in so nicely with the way that like Mograph works in cinema, and I'm sure the way that some of the tools that they've added into other DCCs work. I'm not familiar with them. I know that there's some in Maya now, and I think there's some in 3ds Max and stuff. But like, I'm sure there's some in Blender. Blender they do everything now too. So, but like, it's basically a way of saying, instead of looking at these, pieces of geometry as they are here, where there are all these different elements and points and pieces and stuff, we get to this state right here, and now they're just 100. And now we just have points that we're working with. And now we can just start transforming those points, changing the orients on those points, and doing stuff like that. Now, that's no trivial thing, changing orientation, basically a quaternion that's building your orient. That's no simple feat to just, hey, I'll just type this up real quick. So what they have done is amazing, amazing stuff as far as ways that you can manipulate and tweak these things. But we could actually delete all of those, basically remove those packed primitives and just have, we have some of the same attributes and stuff there, but we could just get rid of the primitives off of that, and we just have now unconnected points, just 100 points with no primitives, no anything on it, and kind of rebuild it back into something that's interesting. And in fact, if we packed this here, we'd be right back to having 100 packed geometries with 100 points, all that stuff. So it's right back to the exact same kind of starting point, just with different objects that are packed in there. And in fact, see, that is interesting though. The object path has stayed the same. So probably what I would want to do is delete a couple things in here, like the object path, maybe the name and stuff like that. But I was like just kind of playing with this yesterday, I don't know, a couple days ago, just to see if this actually works or not. But the one thing that you could even do is you could actually, I'm trying to think how I did that even now. I basically just took, I don't even remember now. Basically, I drove an attribute that would set what variance you're setting here on this copy to points, based on this original object path. I think that's what it was. And so, or I use this, that's right, I use this Mops index, that's right. They actually had this already. That's way more simple. And so basically I use the Mops index as like my variant name. And then if you had, let's see. Basically, you could build this back up to be where you have variants that you're loading, and based on those, it'll actually copy the specific variant. If you use this piece attribute right here to look at the specific variant that you're inputting and copy it to the point that has that specific attribute that you're looking for. Say it's, you're looking for index 1, it'll bring the index 1 object and copy it to that point. So these are some of the things that they've built in there, right? So like, that's the really beautiful thing about this is like, that's going to take me 15 minutes to do. Here it takes me 5 seconds, and they plug in and you're good to go. So that's the thing that they've done with this Mops system, and why it's, I think, so interesting and helpful. But it's good to know kind of the underlying principles that are happening there too, because you get to the end here of your, let's just say get down here, right? And you've got all this geometry and it's done whatever, and you want to start affecting this or doing something to it. I'm not even sure, how they, I guess it probably is this Mops convert. Nope. No, that's actually the other way. That's converting it into Mops. So like, I guess that's the thing that, sorry, my brain just froze for a second there. There's probably something here. Yeah, I actually don't see something that they have to turn it into geometry again. So really all you have to do is do an unpack. If you wanted to bring this back into geometry world, right? You did an unpack here. That should, that's going to bring it right back into geometry, right? Obviously this is not going to be fast anymore, right? So this is going to be slow as molasses because it's unpacking everything that's being done with that pack geometry and now trying to rewrite it. So like, if you just look at this here now too, think about this. You're now manipulating, 3.2 million polygons and 3.2 million primitives and a ton of points and all this stuff. Like, that's a lot of geometry to be messing with. But when you're working with it right here, and this all happens in real time. I mean, there's no, it'll probably happen faster than real time if I uncheck this. Yeah, I mean, I can get up to 50 frames a second on this. You know what I mean? Not to say this is a lot of geometry or anything like that, but it certainly isn't a trivial amount of geometry. And in fact, we could probably push this even further, right? We could set this to be really easily by let's just say, and obviously that is not going to do some of the things we had to do it before, but we play this back, right? I mean, we're still getting 20 frames a second here on this, and if we unpacked this, it's gonna get angry at me for a second, but we'll let it run. Okay. Nope. Still mad. We have 20 million. Yeah. You got 20 million points, polys, things like that. So, it's not gonna be very happy at us. I mean, obviously you can move around in the viewport just fine, all that kind of stuff, but that's really the beauty of working with these packed primitives and with the instancing that you're dealing with there, because you're only dealing with that geometry on disk or being saved in memory like once basically and then copied. So you're saving a ton of memory every time you do that. So that's kind of the idea of, and just one of the things that I wanted to kind of touch on, for anybody that hasn't used Mops before and is like thinking it's like, oh gosh, I have to use this in order to get any of these things to work like that. And yes, it's true that you could rebuild this. I mean, obviously they built this using standard Houdini stuff, right? This isn't like Solaris where the developers went in and created this whole new thing. These are HDAs basically that they've created. And so they've created an entire workflow for you to be able to stay within this kind of way of thinking and create really interesting stuff. Obviously what I've created is very simple and test geometry, but so hopefully that makes sense as far as like what Mops is and what it isn't, and why it's helpful, and why you can even still tweak it and do things with it outside of its own Mops nodes, basically. Like, you don't have to only use Mops nodes to interact with that. It's just making a really straightforward framework of things that you can work within. So hopefully that makes some sense, and is at least a good starting point for you. Yeah, I would obviously recommend any of their training that they have on it. I mean, the stuff that they're going to be able to do with it is going to be amazing and really cool to be able to see the extents at which you can take this system and kind of push it. So, but yeah, I think hopefully to see just what this is doing, and how it kind of can be beneficial to you. And just as an example too, like if we really go crazy with this, the one really amazing thing that they've done in Houdini recently is that if you look at these objects, which it's interesting, like to update these for some. Oh, interesting. I don't know why that isn't, because there's a solver in there and I have to reset it, and it's probably not super happy with me, which makes sense. So let me do that. There we go. All right, that's why it's not happy, because there's a solver in there. So anyways, one of the things that you can probably see here is that as we kind of move around this scene, they're kind of becoming these gray boxes in the background, and that is an optimization that they added into Houdini to be able to make sure that your viewport doesn't bog down if you have these packed primitives in here. And basically what it can actually do is just knows what the bounds of this object are and basically replaces it with a bounding box. And if you get in close, it switches it back to the geometry, and it just makes sure that your viewport stays pretty snappy, honestly. Like, I mean, this is what, 40 whatever frames a second, and it's not going to play back super fast, but I mean, we've got a lot of geometry in here that's being manipulated and moved around, and you still have fairly interactive frame rates here. And if you're ever looking to see where to adjust something like that, you can go into your display options by hitting D, and I believe it's under Optimize, and right here there's a distance-based packed geometry culling, and you can adjust your scene polygon limit. So if we set that to be like, say, 10 million, the viewport's going to run even faster, but you're only going to get a little chunk of your stuff that you're actually seeing. I wonder if this will play faster. Kind of. Not particularly faster, but maybe a little. But that is a really nice thing. So obviously you can kind of see what your computer can or can't handle and kind of go from there. So I mean, like, yeah, this works. I mean, it's not great. It's 20 frames a second or whatever, but so this is kind of a neat thing too, just the fact that they're working within this packed primitive workflow, and you get the benefits that any packed geometry would have in Houdini by using Mops. So that's kind of a cool thing as well. This is this is a way that you could do that. And again, like I said, if you were using just a regular copy to points that you're packing, same situation would apply, but it's just a different way of kind of getting there, basically. So anyways, I don't want to try to go too deep into this. I think there's probably plenty of training out there on how to make really cool stuff with this, but I just kind of wanted to talk about conceptually what's going on with this mop system, and how kind of it works, and just some of the fun stuff that you can do within Houdini. So I don't know, does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that? I know you were saying you're interested to see some basic stuff, so hopefully that's at least helpful, interesting to see from maybe more of a technical standpoint, but yeah, hopefully it's a somewhat interesting take on what's going on there. I mean, there's a ton of stuff you can do in here with Mops. I know that there's trails and different things like that you can do with it. Cool, good. I'm glad it was at least helpful. Oh, another thing I want to comment on is their parallel transport is a really nice way to be able to get orientation along a spline, and you can use that for, I mean, anything. You don't have, this isn't like a specifically you need to do. Yeah, let me just do this real quick. Let's see. What could I do this with? I'm just gonna make a curve. Something simple. Let's do this. Just literally make whatever super basic curve. This was one of the things that I think Manuel. He had made these, and he was showing how this parallel transport thing works, and then they added it into Mops, I'm pretty sure. What's our thing here? Random curve. I'm just middle clicking and just kind of dragging these around just so they're not all on the same exact plane. It's fine. That should. I'm just gonna sample this. It's kind of gigantic, but whatever. Let me just. Okay, so the thing that this does is if we do a sweep, now I think they've actually changed this a little bit, but let's see. I know at one point, this wouldn't work. And yeah, that is now. Oh, turn that for a second there. Oh, okay. So they have changed this a little bit, but if you ever run into an issue where you're needing good, you know, normals and tangents and things like that on your splines, the parallel transport in here is really nice too. So you could do like N, and then up. But basically what you can do here is you can have 3 different vectors in here, and this will make a really nice smooth. Actually, that's sorry. Don't want this. We want to do vector. Just do this one. So what these actually will do is the actual direction. And so it'll create these really smooth kind of, different orientations that go around these curves and stuff like that. Sometimes you'll have like curves and trying to set up something to like sweep it, or anything like that. They have added some things into normal into some of the Houdini tools that have some of these curve calculations and stuff. But just a really nice way to get some really clean, sweeping kind of vectors that are actually on your curves and geometry and stuff, and it won't like buckle weird. It like always kind of stays in a nice orientation. So it's just a really nice way to be able to get like curves and paths and stuff like that to follow the right direction. So then you just anything that uses different things like this, like a sweep or whatever other nodes that you might use, you could actually have it follow that properly and have a really nice smooth attribute change along your curve. So anyways, that's just one that I really thought was a nice one that they added in there, and they have some other utilities in there. I haven't looked at all of them per se, but yeah. So, well, I think that's where I'm going to end the stream for this evening. Hopefully there was some cool stuff that you could get in there. I got to figure out that collision thing in the particles. I don't know why those weren't colliding the way I thought they should have. But yeah, hopefully overall helpful. And yeah, thanks for joining me. If you want to connect with me on social media, you can either contact me at Peter Kubik. That's my just personal Twitter handle, or Houdini Hangout is the handle for the stream. So if you want to connect with me either of those places, I'm usually fairly active on Twitter. Even if I'm not sending out messages all the time, I am on there quite often. So if you message me, I should get back to you hopefully fairly soon. But yeah, that is my stream for the evening. Yeah, glad you did too. It was really nice to get to chat with you, and yeah, I will. I'll be updating my Twitter with whatever I'll be thinking about doing next week. Maybe something totally different, maybe something similar. Not really sure, but yeah. Good night. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us, and yeah, I'll talk to you. Hopefully, talk to you guys again soon. So, have a great evening, and thank you for joining me.